All right, here we go. Salute to Knicks Nation on this Thursday afternoon. A special edition of KnicksFanTV Live. CP the franchise here. Special guest. I've been hoping to have this conversation with him for a while, man. He's the voice of the Knicks, the voice of the Rangers, the voice of many teams because he's the only full-time broadcaster to cover all four major league sports, among many other milestones. And we're going to talk about his new book, A Mic for All Seasons. He is the great Kenny Albert. Kenny, welcome to KnicksFanTV, man. Thanks again for the time.
Great to be here. Great to be with you, and appreciate you acquiring a copy of my book.
Oh, it's a great book, an outstanding book for a lifelong New Yorker like myself, and someone who's listened to you over a number of years, be that voice for so many key games, whether it's, Knicks or Rangers or Giants, so on and so forth. So I really wanted to dig into that book, and there were so many gems that I was able to pull out of it. What was your motivation behind writing and releasing that book?
Well, it was really a long process, and for 30 plus years, I've done one thing basically, and that's play-by-play. So now to actually have a book out there with my name on the cover, it's kind of surreal. And even more surreal when I look at that cover and see the names Walt Clyde Frazier and Wayne Gretzky, who were, so gracious to take part in writing the forwards. Two gentlemen that I've had the pleasure of working with who were unbelievable athletes, but even better people. And I know Clyde as well, personally. I always felt like I had a lot of stories to tell, just from calling the various sports, favorite games that I've worked, travel stories, anecdotes about color analysts that I've worked with, and much more. Stories about growing up in a sportscasting family, a story about my birth. I was 3 months premature and spent the first 2 months in Lenox Hill Hospital in an incubator. I was 1 pound, 15 ounces. So perhaps that part of the first chapter gives inspiration perhaps to other parents and children who have gone through the same thing. But I always speak to high school and college broadcasting students, hundreds of them every summer, at various sportscasting camps and programs that are held around the New York, New Jersey, Connecticut area. And they always ask great questions, the up-and-coming broadcasters, and I wind up answering a lot of the same questions, telling a lot of the same stories each and every time. And during the pandemic, when we were all sitting at home with a lot of time on our hands, I was with my family, my wife and 2 girls, and decided at that point, I have all this time, why not start to put pen to paper and share some of these stories and anecdotes. So really started during the pandemic, the summer of 2020, put together an outline, some sample chapters, and I had been contacted by a book agent, Andrew Blauner, in Manhattan, and he had said to me that if I ever thought about writing a book, perhaps he can connect me with a publisher, and that's exactly what took place. Triumph Books out of Chicago, and it was a long process, about 2.5 years between the writing and the editing, but it all came together, and just so proud to actually see the final product when it arrived at my house last August. But it's a compilation of, like I said, stories about the four major sports that I've been involved in for the last 20, 25, 30 years, a chapter on the Olympics, a chapter paying it forward to young broadcasters, etc. So glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely did. And, there were so many milestones in here. Just to name a few, like I said at the top of the show, doing play-by-play for all major sports. The only broadcaster to currently be doing that. You were a part of the inaugural NFL on Fox announcing team, and now the longest tenured announcer on the NFL on Fox. This is when, the joke in the book when Madden says, how do they call it Fox Sports when they're only talking about football? So that was way back when. You're covering the Rangers, you're covering the Knicks, a lifelong dream, just in the steps, of your father. Which one of those milestones is the most valuable to you or means the most to you?
Right, and you bring up Fox, and there is a chapter entitled "Thank You, Rupert," referring to Rupert Murdoch, which references the early years at Fox and getting hired at such a young age, along with some other great broadcasters, Joe Buck and Kevin Harlan and Tom Brenneman. The four of us were all hired at that time as young play-by-play broadcasters. So that was a very special part of my life professionally. Calling the Rangers Canucks Stanley Cup final in 1994 for the NHL radio network. Actually met my wife during that series. We would not have met had the Rangers not been in the Stanley Cup, and actually would not have met if they had won Game 5, which they wound up losing and went on to win the series in Game 7. Was hired by MSG Networks in 1995, primarily on the Rangers radio side. And as you know, I've been heavily involved on the Knicks side for the last 15 years or so, calling about 15 to 20 games a year when Mike Breen's on national assignments. So, those subjects are all covered in the book. It's hard to pick out one that stands alone above the others, but there are also some, really fun stories. I was doing the sideline reporting for Fox during the 2003 American League Championship Series, Yankees and Red Sox, and it was the Aaron Boone game when Boone homered in extra innings to put the Yankees, to move them on to the World Series. And I was doing the interviews in the clubhouse and handling the trophy presentation. And as I write about in the book, when we were finished, I had noticed Mayor Bloomberg standing off to the side, and his public relations person came over to me and asked, "Will you interview the mayor next?" And I said, "We're actually off the air already." It was like 1 a.m, and we had gone to the late local news. And this gentleman said to me, "Can you fake it?" He didn't want to lose his job. So wound up doing about a 5-minute fake interview with Mayor Bloomberg that was never actually recorded, never went out on the air anywhere. Another story about my former roommate during my minor league hockey broadcasting days, Barry Trotz, who's gone on to become one of the greatest coaches in NHL history, coached the Islanders for 4 years, won a Stanley Cup with Washington. He was our assistant coach in Baltimore when I was hired to do radio for a minor league hockey team, the Baltimore Skipjacks. And as a prank, they would get one person every year, and I was the victim of a fake arrest when we landed in Canada back in 1992. So I try to sprinkle some of those fun stories throughout the book as well.
You mentioned your time with the Dream Team as a statistician with NBC and following your father there to Barcelona. What was your favorite story from that 92 experience?
Right, that was incredible. He was doing the play-by-play, obviously, with Mike Fratello and Quinn Buckner. They were the broadcast team for NBC, and I was there handling statistics and research. I was actually already 2 years into my broadcasting career. I had been doing minor league hockey, and I was just hired by the Washington Capitals to work their games on cable television. But it was an opportunity I really couldn't pass up to go back behind the scenes, do the stats. And, I don't think there's really one particular moment that stands out, but just sitting courtside for each and every game. I remember the Angola game that's referenced often, Charles Barkley's comments heading into that game. I think the United States won by 44 points. And I have a photo album. It was before the days of cell phone cameras, so I had a real old-fashioned camera with me. So I have some photos, some grainy, blurry photos that I took of Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson and Larry Bird from that front row seat that I had at the 92 Olympics.
When you talk about covering all four major sports, I look at it like, for one, do you even get a day off? Because is there even an off season for you? But what's been like the craziest stretch of games that you have to cover in like a short amount of time?
Well, I do have a lot of days off in the summer. In fact, my wife and I just snuck away to Paris for 6 days.
Nice. Okay.
Just got back earlier this week. So it was nice to get away after the 9-month grind. A lot of travel and a lot of work that goes into what I do, but it's so much fun. There's nothing else that I would rather be doing than calling sporting events. But from September through late May, early June, there are not many days off as far as no travel or no game. It's usually one or the other. Either a game at home at the Garden, travel, a game elsewhere, whether it's football, hockey, basketball, Rangers, NHL on TNT, Knicks and MSG, NFL on Fox. But the summer's a lot quieter. I have several baseball games spread out over the course of the summer with Fox. Also working the Olympics again this summer from Stamford, Connecticut, remotely. Looking forward to that. It will be Olympics number 9 for me, 6 in person and 3 remotely from Stamford, Connecticut, from the NBC facility. So it's the 9 months of craziness, and then 3 months that are a lot quieter. Wrapped up the hockey Western Conference final with Edmonton and Dallas a couple of weeks ago. So I've had some downtime since then. But to get back to the second part of the question,
yeah.
the craziest periods are usually October, November, December, when everything's going on at once. Football, hockey, basketball. I've had some periods of time in past Octobers where I had all four sports within the course of a week or 10 days. NFL on Sundays. I worked some baseball playoff series with Fox back in 2015 through 2019. And then, of course, hockey and basketball getting underway during the month of October as well. Those are always the most fun times for me. I feel like the crazier it is, the more fun. I actually get more work done on planes, in Ubers, taxis, in hotel rooms. So that's really not an issue when there's so much going on at once.
Well, one of the common themes when I read the book, and especially when you start with a lot of the testimonials in the book, a lot of your colleagues and your peers, it's preparation. It's a common theme for a lot of high achievers. What does that prep look like? Let's take a look from the lens of like a Knick game. What does that preparation look like from your perspective?
The preparation is probably the biggest thing I learned growing up from my father, my uncles, other broadcasters out there who I studied, watched, and listened to in the New York area. The preparation for a Knick game is a little bit different than what it is for some of the other sports. Football is by far the most volume of preparation during those 4 months. If I'm not eating, sleeping with my family, or calling another game, or preparing for a game in another sport, it's all about that week's football game, because the broadcasters who work NFL games on the TV side are not associated with a specific team. So we might have an assignment, let's say week 15 of the season. It could be two teams that we haven't done all year. So you have to play catch up on their entire season. There are 50 plus players on each roster you have to learn. I usually start Monday morning by watching each team's previous game. I start to prepare charts and go through statistics and read every article out there about the two teams that I'm working that week. Monday through Thursday, you're kind of on your own. But then on Friday, we usually go to the home team practice and get to sit down with 4 or 5 players and coaches. We'll do the same thing Saturday with the visiting team when they get in. Once in a while, we'll do it on Zoom. That really started during the pandemic when we were unable to meet teams in person due to the various protocols. Then we have our own production meeting on Saturday night, and then Sunday at 1, they kick off. Hockey and basketball aren't as much preparation as football because you're around the teams all the time. Even if I'm not working an Knicks game, for example, I'm watching the other games that they're playing. I'm reading everything about the team. I'll usually start in on the opponent about a week before. So if the Knicks are playing the Jazz, for example, on a Tuesday, the prior Tuesday or Wednesday, I'll start reading articles about the Jazz, catching up on their season. I'll put together my chart with biographical information on all the players. If it's an away game, I often travel with the team on the charter, which is certainly a nice perk, unless I'm coming from somewhere else. Once in a while, I'm coming from another assignment. So you're around the team a little bit. We'll occasionally go to the shoot-arounds. We'll go to the coach press conferences, talk to players on occasion. Similar for hockey. If I'm doing a Wednesday game for TNT, we'll go to the morning skate, as it's referred to in hockey. We'll get a chance to go in the locker room and listen to what the players have to say, talk to coaches. But I have a checklist for each and every game that I do, no matter what the sport. And it involves watching prior games, doing a ton of reading, preparing the charts, pouring through the statistics. And, these days, there's so much information out there. You can definitely over-prepare, and I'm an over-preparer. When I started in my professional career, the internet didn't even exist. So we were relying on daily newspapers and weekly publications and information provided to us by the teams and by the leagues. Now you go on the computer, the iPad, the phone, and you could pretty much, you could read for 26 hours a day if you wanted to.
And as you said in the book, especially on an NFL broadcast, you're only using maybe 5 to 10% of all the information that you're ingesting. So that's a pretty incredible part of the preparation for sure. And when you think about your journey, I mean, there were so many stops along your journey, was there ever a point? I know this was your dream from a young age, and you're following Marv from those early days. But along your journey, were you ever detracted? Like, man, this is not necessarily where I need to be. Was there ever a point where you kind of felt like you were steering away from it?
Never felt like I was steering away from it. Like you read about in the book. Started at a young age. My parents gave me a tape recorder for my birthday when I was 5 years old, and it's really all that I ever wanted to do. I did a lot of writing as well in high school and college, covering sports for various school and town publications. But I always knew that I wanted to do play-by-play. I was very fortunate in high school. I was covering a girls' basketball game for the high school paper, and a local cable station, Cox Cable of Great Neck, showed up at my high school in Port Washington, unbeknownst to me, to film this basketball game. And our athletic director introduced me to the producer, Roy Menton, and he said to me, "Look, we have two cameras, we have a little production van, and no announcers. Do you want to do it?" So I said, "Sure." I was in 10th grade at the time. They clipped a microphone onto my shirt. I sat in the second row calling this game, and all the people around me probably thought, that I was crazy talking to myself for the entire game, but I was actually announcing into the microphone. And I spoke to Roy the next day, the producer, and he gave me the opportunity over the next 3 years to broadcast so many different high school and college sports around Long Island on Cox Cable. And I would bring friends along as color analysts. And it was such invaluable experience because back in those days, you couldn't really do it until college. Nowadays, kids start in elementary school, and high schools have great broadcasting programs, but that wasn't the case back in the mid to late 80s. So I felt like I had a 3-year head start on anyone else my age who wanted to get into it. Then I went on to NYU. We called the Division III men's and women's basketball games. We had a great program at the time. They still do at NYU, and that was so valuable as well, rotating between the different positions, play-by-play, color analyst, statistician, producer, engineer, and was very fortunate to get hired by the Baltimore Skipjacks to do the minor league hockey for 2 years. And that was probably the only time I remember, thinking to myself during that 2-year period, will I ever make it to the next level? And you never know for sure. And at the time, there were only 21 NHL teams. Now there were 32. So expansion led to so many more jobs for broadcasters, with 11 more teams now than there were then. You have TV, radio, so that's 22 more play-by-play openings than back in the early 90s. So I don't want to say there was ever doubt, but definitely during those 2 years, was wondering what it would take to get to that next level, and was very fortunate to get hired by Home Team Sports in Washington at the time back in 92 to call Capitals hockey. And then I also filled in on some Bullets basketball games, now the Wizards, of course, Orioles baseball games. So always loved the variety, and the folks at Home Team Sports gave me the opportunity to continue with that variety, calling NHL hockey, some NBA basketball, some baseball, and a multitude of college sports as well.
Yeah, and that's why I ask, because your father's the legendary Marv Albert. So did you feel like along that journey when you're at the Skipjacks, did you feel pressure to kind of follow in his footsteps and reach the heights that he had reached in his career?
I never really felt pressure. I did feel like by moving away to Baltimore and then Washington for a total of 5 years down in Maryland, that did give me the opportunity to sort of create my own identity away from him, away from my hometown, and then wound up moving back in 95 when I was hired by MSG. But maybe I should have felt pressure, but I never really did. I always felt like I was working hard and practicing and getting those reps, and learned so much, from watching him via osmosis, by tagging along, by keeping stats for him, by watching other announcers. And my goal at the time was really to do hockey on the radio. That was what I wanted to do. And that was the first job in Baltimore. And, like I said, they gave me the opportunity down in Washington to fill in on some other sports. And then, Fox acquiring the rights to football, as we touched on briefly earlier, Rupert Murdoch making this crazy bid to get the NFC package away from CBS, who had it for 38 years at the time. I mean, never in my wildest dreams, the wildest dreams of Joe Buck and Kevin Harlan and Tom Brennan, I don't think any of us thought we'd ever be doing NFL football on network television, especially at such a young age. back then it was NBC and CBS, and then ABC had Monday Night Football, and all the broadcasters were in their 40s and 50s. They had been doing it forever. So, um, Fox acquiring those rights, that was probably the break, by far the biggest break of
Yeah.
all of our careers at the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, your journey and the names that you list, you and starting together, it's so interesting. And one of the stories on the NFL on Fox topic, one of the stories that you had shared here was that for that kind of that kickoff lunch in Beverly Hills with Summerall and all these guys, and they're sharing stories. In the backdrop is Game 7 of the NBA Finals between the Knicks and the Rockets. I mean, how were you able to concentrate on dinner when the Knicks and the Rockets are battling for the NBA Finals, especially in '94 when the Rangers had already clinched?
Yeah, that was a wild couple of weeks. Hard to believe it was 30 years ago. I
Yeah,
mean, we
yeah,
just we just last week passed the 30-year anniversary of the Rangers winning the cup, the Knicks playing in the finals against the Rockets, and I actually went to games 3, 4, and 5 at the Garden as a fan. The Rangers won the cup on a Tuesday, the 14th. Sunday, the 12th, I flew back from Vancouver after game 6, went to game 3 of the Knicks Rocket series. Rangers win the cup on the Tuesday. I went to game 4 on Wednesday. That's when Messier brought the cup out to center court at halftime. And then game 5 of the Knicks series was the day of the Rangers parade, June 17th on a Friday. It was about 100 degrees in the city.
yeah.
You had the Rangers parade in the afternoon, the Knicks game 5 at night, and the OJ chase that same night, the car chase, which wound up on the scoreboard briefly during the game at the Garden because NBC had switched over to the news reports. And then a couple of days later, I flew out to Los Angeles and we had these initial Fox meetings, the initial get together. And I remember like it was yesterday in this restaurant in Beverly Hills, they had a couple of TVs right behind our table. And game 7 of the Knicks Rockets was on. And I remember being back in the hotel room by the time the game ended and wound up watching the fourth quarter there. But have such distinct memories of going to games 3, 4, and 5 of that series and then watching game 6 and then game 7 out in LA.
Incredible. Was there a favorite Knicks team that you enjoyed watching either as a kid or just throughout your broadcasting journey? Was there a favorite team?
It's funny because I was a little too young to remember the championship teams. I was 2 years old in 1970, 5 years old in 73. I do have vague memories of going with my parents to the City Hall celebration to honor the 1973 Knicks team. So I vaguely remember that. But during my childhood, when I would say 7 through 12 or 13, the biggest memories, and I went to a lot of games, were the guys like Ray Williams and Michael Ray Richardson and Toby Knight and Sly Williams and Larry Demick. I know I'm bringing up a lot of names from the past, but Rory Sparrow. I mean, those are the teams that I watched. And then when I was in high school was when they won the lottery to draft Patrick Ewing and Bill Cartwright had been drafted a couple of years before. But my biggest memories as a kid were those teams, sort of in between, the dynasty, the 2 championships in 70 and 73, and the late 80s, early 90s, and then on to the finals in 94. Now, I kept the stats with my father and John Andres for the 4 years that I was in college. So I was right there at courtside from 86, 87 through 89, 90. So a lot of great memories from those teams as well, coached by Rick Pitino, making the playoffs, beating the Celtics. I was at that game. I was in Philly for the sweep. I remember that one as well. So also a lot of good memories of those teams that made it to the playoffs in the late 80s. And I remember Michael Jordan coming in as an opponent, as a rookie, second, third year player. And there was always such a buzz around the Garden. I remember going to Dr. J's last game at the Garden, Kareem's last game at the Garden, and they actually they honored those players, even though they were on visiting teams. They honored them at halftime, both Dr. J and Kareem. But then I moved away for a couple of years. I was down in Maryland and D.C., so I wasn't really around during that 90 to 95 period, but was up, like I said, to watch those games in the finals in 94. Went to one of the games in the 99 final series against San Antonio as a fan. And then it was really around 2008, 2009, that season when I started to fill in for Mike and worked some games with Clyde and have been so fortunate to be in that role ever since, starting with the 08 09 season, right up until the current time, working between 15 and 20 games per year. Most of them with Clyde, but other terrific analysts as well that I have the great pleasure to work with, whether it's Wally Zerbiak, Alan Hahn, Monica McNutt, just a great roster that we have at MSG.
For sure. And once again, CP the Franchise here, special edition of Knicks Fan TV. We are talking to the great Kenny Albert. His book, Mike for All Seasons, is in store now. Go ahead and get it. Trust me, it is filled with a ton of great stories and highlights from Kenny's illustrious 30-plus year career. Kenny, on these Knicks, since you were covering that team, what was the most memorable game that you covered as a broadcaster?
Wow, it's probably hard to come up with one. There were so many great moments, during the Amari Stoudemire, Carmelo Anthony run. I remember working some games when Amari put together that crazy streak of 30-point games.
Yeah.
I remember the David Lee triple double in Golden State. That one stands out. But just over the last 4 years, seeing this team come together, a playoff team 3 of the last 4 years. The 2020-21 season was so bizarre when we called the games during the pandemic.
Yeah.
We were about 20 rows up at MSG with plexiglass surrounding us, no fans in the building. We had to have a COVID test taken prior to each and every game. So that was definitely surreal. But then, during these last couple of years, so many great memories, following the signing of Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, going back again to his first season as a Knick, and so many of the great moments that he provided, and called one of the playoff games last year, not the 2023-24 season, but during the 22-23 playoffs, called one of those games against Cleveland at home. That's probably the loudest that I've heard the Garden during a Knicks game that I've worked over these last 15 years was the playoff game against Cleveland at the Garden in 23.
What have you seen from Jalen Brunson now in year 2? I mean, he's taken the city, this fan base by storm. What's that like watching him in person as a broadcaster?
Just incredible. I mean, I think back to this January and February when Randall first got hurt and then Anunoby got hurt. In particular, a game that I worked in Charlotte, where they were just double and triple teaming Jalen Brunson, right from the start, and it didn't matter. He was able to work his magic, despite what the defense was doing to him. And I don't know if there's anybody that could have predicted that he would have been this good. Once he signed with the Knicks, he was obviously a terrific player in college. Got off to a really good start to his NBA career in Dallas. But if you go back and look at some of the articles and comments when he signed, everybody was excited, but I don't think any of us could have imagined what we've seen over this 2-year period.
And as you said, at times you ride with the team on the charters. From the outside, everybody can see a united locker room, the chemistry, the jovial spirit within that locker room. Who's been one of your favorite guys to cover from this team?
It really seems to be such a tight group, and that starts from management on down to the coaching staff. What a tremendous job Tom Thibodeau's done in his 4 years with the Knicks. But, a lot of it, I guess you can credit to that Villanova group and the togetherness that they've shown. I got to know Ryan Arcidiacono pretty well during some of those bus and plane rides when he's been with the team over the last 2 years. I know he has an interest in my part of the business. He could be a potential broadcaster someday, or maybe even a coach. So we've had some good chats, but you can just tell how tight they are. Not only the Villanova group, but the entire team, and it starts with management and the coaching staff.
Is there, like I said, when I look through your book, there's so many milestones and achievements. Is there a challenge when you're broadcasting, when you're broadcasting a Knick game? What's a challenging aspect of your job when you're covering the team?
That's a great question. I try to prepare for every game the same, whether it's a preseason game or a playoff game, because you never know what might come up during the course of that broadcast. To me, when I think back to the 15 plus years of working games with Clyde, He's right at the top of the list as far as all of the analysts that I've ever worked with. Every game is just so much fun. He's a living legend. He's the only person in the Basketball Hall of Fame as both a player and a broadcaster. I refer to him as the Hall of Famer times two. And he just sees the game like nobody else that I've ever met or worked with. And some of the stories that he can tell. Dating back to his high school and college days, and then his early days with the Knicks. And one of my favorite stories from Clyde is about the time that he bought a first class ticket for the All-Star MVP trophy that he won the mid '70s in Phoenix, and he had to actually buy a seat on the plane for the trophy. So always loves when he brings that one up. But he's such a student of the game. When he's in his hotel room, when he's at home, he's watching so many other games, NBA games, college games, and he'll throw something out there. I would say once a quarter, and I'll say to myself, "Wow, I mean, how did he know that?" But you could just tell that he's paying attention and that he's watching and that he's doing research, and he has just this memory bank, from 60 years of his involvement in the game. So just so much fun to work with Clyde and the entire unbelievable crew. The producer Spencer Julian, director Howie Singer has been at it for 40 years, working Knicks games. So the camaraderie, I talked about the camaraderie amongst the team, but amongst the broadcast crew as well. And I think that carries across on the air. When I watch Mike and Clyde, they're certainly among the best in the business as far as a broadcast team in any sport with a regional sports network. And I'm just so proud that I get to step in and fill Mike's shoes for those 15 or 20 games every year.
And when I think about when you mentioned the busiest time is typically in the fall, that late fall, October, November time when all the sports are in play, and you may go from working with Clyde to working with Darryl Moose Johnson on football, or you go into another sport. How about the cadence with that you have to build with your color analyst from sport to sport to sport? How do you develop that where you're not stepping on each other's toes and there seems to be a natural flow and chemistry in the broadcast?
Right. That's a great question. I guess I'm pretty used to it from 30 plus years of going back and forth. I always study my color analyst before I work with them for the first time. In the case of Clyde, it's been 15 years. I worked with Moose Johnston for 10 years, and I've worked with Jonathan Vilma now for 4 seasons, going on 5 on the NFL side. Dave Maloney for 19 years on Rangers radio. So you build up that chemistry, although once in a while I might work with a color analyst that I haven't worked with before on a one-off basis. But, to me, it's some of those little subtle reminders. I could go from an NFL game on a Monday, on a Sunday, to a Knicks game on a Wednesday or Thursday. And in football, it's the play clock, but in basketball, it's the shot clock. So I have to give myself little reminders once in a while. You don't want to say the wrong thing. In football, you have the Carolina Panthers. Then in hockey, you have the Florida Panthers and the Carolina Hurricanes. So
right.
I don't think I've ever mixed up any of the names, but it's the little things like that, I think, more so than the chemistry with the color analyst. That kind of comes naturally, but there are definitely little pointers. I'm constantly studying, and I might read articles about 4 different sports in one day, but I sort of have a way to compartmentalize it where it doesn't all get thrown together in my head, and I can keep the sports separate, in that aspect. But there are those little reminders, and you have to keep up with the rules, rule changes at every sport. That's a big part of it as well.
What brought me to sports, especially as a youngster, was the unscripted nature of it, right? By the end, something new is happening or another story is being told, especially with the Knicks in the 90s Knicks and those tales against Jordan and the Bulls and those rivalries. As a broadcaster, you're calling these classic games. You still have to be in the moment and do your job. Do you ever go home like the next day like, I got to watch that again, just from a fan perspective and see what was that just unfolded? Do you ever do that? Just go back and watch these historical moments that you covered?
Well, the one in recent years that probably fits the bill would be and it just snuck in. I was able to sneak it into the book just before the book was due to the publishers. It was the crazy New England Las Vegas the lateral play at the end of the game
Mm.
2 years ago out in Vegas. The Patriots and Raiders were tied, and the New England player started laterally the ball, and then Chandler Jones intercepted it, ran it back for a game-winning touchdown with no time left on the clock. That was one of those where, as it's going on, you can't believe what you're watching, and you're trying to describe it. So I definitely went back and watched that one a couple of times. Um, in hockey, had the good fortune to work the Stanley Cup final 2 of the last 3 years. It rotates, so ESPN has it this year. We'll have it again next year with TNT, but those were certainly big moments back in 2021, calling the Cup final. Tampa Bay beat Montreal, and then in 23, it was Vegas over Florida. Um, and as far as particular Knicks games this year, we sort of had a running joke through the years where we would all keep track of our records when doing the games. And I think at one point this year, I was on a great record, a great run. I think the Knicks were like 11-2 at one point during the games that I was working. So I had a lot of good moments, during those times as well. I had that incredible comeback against Miami
Oh yeah.
back in November. That was one of the games I worked. So that's probably the one that stands out from this year, where whether I think they scored 17 consecutive points at one
Yeah.
point, trailed by 19 in the third quarter, and came back to win that game against the Heat.
Yeah, that was a great game. I was definitely at that game. And we see the Celtics winning the trophy, winning the Larry O'Brien trophy. Well, how far do you think the Knicks are from the Celtics? The Knicks finished with the number 2 seed this year. A lot of fans have high expectations now. They feel like this team is right there on the cusp. What do you think?
I think they are. I think they're right there on the cusp as well. For all of the Knicks fans out there and those of us who cover the team, and injuries are a part of all sports, and you don't want to make excuses, but you just think about what it might have been, had they had a healthy roster during the Indiana series, during that game 7, and had the opportunity to play the Celtics, because when everybody was healthy and you had, the starting five that you anticipated once you made the trade for Anunoby, what a run the team went on, during that stretch in late December all the way through January. And I worked a number of those games, and there was just such a special feeling. So, we'll see what takes place during the offseason with regard to any moves, the draft, free agency. But when you finish second in the conference and go to game 7 of the second round, and have now gone to the second round in back-to-back years, there are some pretty big expectations. And I think the Knicks certainly are right there on the cusp of taking that next step and advancing past the second round, and hopefully, for those of us who follow the team and root for the team, all the way to the NBA Finals.
Yeah, this is true. And once again, we are talking to the great Kenny Albert, CP the Franchise here, KnicksFanTV Live, lunchtime edition. Kenny, we have our guy, the rhyme animal, Chuck D, is in the chat and sends his greeting. He never misses a show of KnicksFanTV. He's always in here and gives your father a lot of credit. His early broadcasting style influencing Chuck D as an artist, which you put in the book.
Well, I love Chuck, one of my favorite people. I've heard those stories about Chuck listening to Ranger broadcast back in the 60s and 70s, and was so honored that Chuck is one of the folks who took the time to write a blurb, which is in my book, right in the front section. So sending a lot of love to Chuck D.
Absolutely. And a couple more on your illustrious career here. What was, I'm sure there were many, but what was the biggest broadcasting takeaway or advice that you got from Marv?
I get asked that question a lot, and it wasn't like we ever really sat down and had a lesson plan
Right.
drawn up.
Right.
It was so much. And by the way, we're having dinner tonight to celebrate his birthday and
Nice.
Father's Day. So
Nice.
I'll be seeing him in about 5 or 6 hours. But it was mostly what I learned by watching, whether it was at home and he was up in the home office getting work done, preparing for a game. I would tag along on the road. I would go to Channel 4, WNBC with him when he did the 6 and 11 sportscasts. And I would just observe and take it all in and learn via osmosis. And I think the number one thing I learned was the preparation aspect of it. That's definitely the top aspect of the business that I learned from watching him. I would listen and watch pretty much every game that he worked. no matter what the sport, basketball, hockey, football, boxing. He did some baseball pregame and postgame shows and the WNBC sports reports, as I mentioned. But I was a big radio listener. We didn't have cable TV until I was 18. So I was always listening to all of the sports, all of the announcers in the New York area, Yankees, Mets, Knicks, Nets, Rangers, Devils, Islanders, Giants, Jets on the weekend. So I would take a little piece from everybody. Howie Rose was a big influence early on. I got to know Howie and worked with him as an associate producer. Watching all of the baseball broadcasters and Sam Rosen on hockey, and I remember listening to John Sterling on Nets and Islanders games back in the early '70s. Barry Landers on the Islanders. So I feel like I took a little piece from each and every one of those broadcasters that I listened to back during my childhood.
And when you look at, being the only broadcaster who's covering all four major sports, and when I read the book, another theme that I pulled out was embracing being uncomfortable. It's something that I see with a lot of high achievers. How much, when you reflect on your career, how much was, embracing that, being uncomfortable, how much did that lead to new opportunities for you?
As far as being uncomfortable, that would probably come with some of the other sports that I've worked. Hockey, basketball, football, baseball, I followed all those from such a young age. So working those sports, it's like riding a bike. It's not a huge challenge as far as the play-by-play because I've done it for so long, but have had the opportunity to work some boxing, some Olympic track and field, volleyball. Now I'm studying up to work Olympic water polo this coming July and August. So, when you use the word uncomfortable, it's probably more with regard to some of the sports that I didn't follow as much and wasn't around as much as a kid, but also embrace those opportunities. I always tell young broadcasters, do whatever they throw at you. Back when I was working in D.C. as a 25, 26-year-old, aside from the sports that we've talked about, I was assigned on occasion to work college volleyball, college soccer, lacrosse, even college wrestling one time. And that was the one, and I wrote about this in the book, that was the one sport that I really felt like I had no clue what I was talking about when I was working that college wrestling match. Luckily, I had a great partner, a terrific analyst with me. So, again, if you're a young broadcaster out there watching, listening to this, you never know what opportunity might be thrown your way. So try and take advantage of it.
And at this stage in your career, is there any more goals that you're looking to obtain? Are you a goal setter?
Certainly. I think in my position, as a play-by-play announcer, you always want to work those top events. And again, I've had the good fortune to work 8 Olympics, 10 Stanley Cup Finals, 2 of them on the TV side, 8 on the radio side. NBA playoffs, baseball playoffs, worked 1 Super Bowl. It was the world feed. So it wasn't on in the United States, but it was on in the rest of the world. So sure, the goal is to continue to work those big events. Would I love to work a Super Bowl on network TV in the United States someday? Absolutely. Really lucky to know that I'll call the Stanley Cup final again next year, have an Olympics again this summer. Love doing what I'm doing. Never feel like I'm going to work, even though there's so much work and travel involved. My family is such a big part of it. My wife and daughters that get to tag along with me like I did back then. And they understand my schedule better than anybody. Now, like I said, is the quiet time of the year, so I'm home a lot more often during these next couple of months. But no, to get back to the original question, just to continue doing what I'm doing, love everything about it. And again, to continue working some of these big events that I've been so lucky to be a part of.
There you go, man. Well, we wish you continued success. We'll let you get back to some much-needed downtime, but we appreciate the time, man. Kenny Albert, the book, Mike for All Seasons. We put the link up there in the chat. Trust and believe. Go ahead and get that. If you're a sports fan, you're a Kenny Albert fan, there's something in here for you. And, as you said, for you aspiring broadcasters, content creators, there's a ton in here for you, so make sure that you guys pick it up. Kenny, thanks again for the time. We definitely appreciate it, and hopefully we can do this again next time.
Thanks, CP. Really appreciate it. Best of luck in your career. I've enjoyed listening to you on various networks over the last few years, and Keep up the great work, and can't wait for the next Knicks and Rangers season to get underway.
Thanks again, man. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that was once again the great Kenny Albert. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. I hope you guys took something away from it. And yeah, hopefully that you guys are enjoying the lunchtime grind. I see my franchise channel members in the chat. The Rhyme Animal, Chuck D, TM, Mohammed, Mustafa, Father Peace. How you doing? Darlene Bryant. Ron the Dearborn, thank you. Much appreciated. So thanks again for tuning in, guys. We will see you guys for another edition of Knicks Offseason Central. Free agency is upon us. The draft is next week. Hopefully you guys enjoyed last night's draft coverage. We will do one more draft show before, one more mock draft before the actual drafts, and that'll be next Tuesday, followed by the draft next Wednesday. So, like I told you guys, KnicksFanTV is always cooking on season, off season. We are here for you, the number one show for the fans by the fans. Do me one more favor, like, share, and subscribe. And remember that we are available in audio podcast format. So, we'll see you guys next time. Have a great day, everybody. Peace.